All right. Hi, I am Siena Marie, and in this Sketch With Me episode, I'm painting a small gouache portrait of Emilia Clarke. The reference was found in the New Yorker magazine, and this is done with gouache. I believe that I used a basic color set of magenta, ultramarine blue, and lemon yellow from M-Gram. Now, I don't have a ton of experience with gouache. I've mostly used it for sketchbook purposes, and even then, I've only done a few sketches with it. I'm definitely not a gouache artist, and I think you'll see that as you watch me struggle with this portrait. And I'm also working in a Stillmen and Birn sketchbook. It's what I've used, I think, in all of my other sketchbook videos. I haven't finished it yet. It's still the same one. I'll include a clip here of some of my other gouache sketches. I've done landscapes and portraits mostly, nothing too exciting. Mostly just studies of references and direct studies at that. Sadly, I think this portrait is my least favorite of my gouache portrait studies. However, I did kind of set myself up for failure with this one just because I chose a reference that I actually wanted to replicate pretty closely. Like, I wanted it to look like Emilia Clarke. I'm not convinced that it does. And I don't actually do that very much. Most of my work uses portrait references, but I just take the general form and shape and shadows from those. I'm never really too worried about making it look like the person. And so when I do go to do that, it does tend to take a lot more work, and I'm not very good at it. I'll have to do more practice. Yeah, so how I usually start off these little paintings is I fill in general color blocks. I like to start with the darks, the darkest darks, especially in this one, just because the light is a little extreme in this photo. Like, the darks are really dark. So I outline those, and then I start to go in with the lightest lights, and I meet in the middle. I think by setting kind of the two extremes of the skin tone in each study that I do, I'm able to better kind of fill in the middle tones, which I tend to find the hardest to do. And it kind of gives me a range and an idea, like a color range, and I'm able to better identify those midtones, and they can differ quite a bit depending on where they're at on the face and the body. For example, the cheeks and the nose tend to be pinker. Areas closer to bone or with less blood flow tend to be more on the yellow side, and kind of under the eyes is often more purple. And all of this differs by reference and by photo, but that's kind of a general outline of what I do. Yeah, so once I go in with that initial layer, the color blocking layer, I'll try to fine tune things. And with this particular one, I do wish I'd stuck with the skin tones I had here, but I go in and I try to kind of modify them, make them a little more exact. I kind of think I end up going a little too far personally, but this is just a sketch. It's not supposed to be perfect, and I try not to ever fine-tune my sketches until they're perfect, because that's not really the point of sketching. Especially these types of sketches. Like, I know this isn't like a sketchbook sketch, like where, as you'd normally think about it, like a quick thing with pencil and graphite. This is a little more refined than that, but for me, these are sketches just because I'm allowing myself to stop before I get to that point where I think they're perfect. And so it gives me the freedom to kind of just enjoy the process. which I may not enjoy otherwise if I'm doing a big piece, just because I'm really worried about making it fit exactly what I want it to be, and with these it doesn't really have to be anything. Yeah, so Emilia Clarke, I chose her. She's one of my favorite actresses, actually, and I don't have a lot of favorite like actors or actresses really, but of course, like most people, I found her through Game of Thrones. I love the character Daenerys that she plays in the show, and I'm a huge book nerd. Like, I read fantasy growing up constantly, and Game of Thrones was one of my favorites, and her character was, of course, one of my favorite book characters of all time. So that's kind of how I found her, and I find her as an actress to be really, I don't know, just fun to watch. She just seems like a nice person. And after kind of learning about her story with the aneurysms that she had several years ago, I felt compelled to paint a little portrait of her. I think she's beautiful, and I enjoyed painting her face, although I didn't do a great job of it. In this one, I especially loved it because it was made, I think, this portrait photo was taken for the story she released when she talked about her aneurysms. I think she's really admirable. Yeah, so one thing I struggle with gouache, and you'll see me go back and forth trying to get this right, is how the color shifts when they dry. So the whites are never really pure white. Like, it'll look really, really light when you first put it down, but then it'll dry quite a bit darker. And the darks never really dry as dark as you think they're gonna be. And on the paper I'm working on here, because it's gray, I tend to have to layer white, lighter colors pretty heavily to get them to look nice and bright against it. In some ways that's good though, because it kind of allows for some fine tuning. You have to go on top and really get everything just right. But since I don't have a bunch of experience with gouache, it's just been a pretty steep learning curve to figure out color mixing. Because like with oils, you usually kind of you're getting exactly what you're mixing. You know, that's the color you're going to have, and it's not really going to look too different. And watercolors are the other medium I'm familiar with. Watercolors are fairly similar. They do have a bit more of a drying shift than oils, but definitely nowhere near gouache. And with gouache, I think I actually need to buy a black paint. I have burnt umber, and you can mix that with ultramarine blue to get like a pretty dark, which is what I did here, to get a dark brown. But just because of that color shift, I have a really hard time getting just a really nice pure black. And I know a lot of artists don't like using just straight black from the tube, but I actually do. I like the way black looks. And I actually don't mind mixing it with other colors. I think it, in the right circumstance, it can be really useful. So I might have to buy black gouache. At the moment, I really only have a few colors, just because I don't use gouache too much. And one thing, and I don't know if it'll show up in the video, and will probably show up at the end in the close-up shot I do of the final piece, but although this dark background looks pretty dark now, when it dries, it's definitely a lot lighter, and it's kind of patchy. And it kind of got dirty. Like, I ended up painting a picture on the other side of this sketchbook. So then when they closed, the gouache from the other picture, which was a lighter color, kind of like stuck to this one. So there's like, it's just a little dirty. It's not as clean as I wish it was. I'm not sure what caused that. It might just be that I layered the gouache too thickly, or I might have to just spray it with like a fixative to make sure that it doesn't transfer. Or it might be the paper. I don't know that Stillmen and Birn's paper is as nice as, like, say, a cotton grade paper that would be more absorbent and possibly be able to hold more paint. I've been really tempted to go buy some nice cotton paper and make a sketchbook from it. but it's just so expensive. I can never bring myself to do it. And I think even if I made it, I'd be so hesitant to use it knowing how expensive it was to make. But I do love cotton paper. It just makes such a difference. Yeah, so one thing I struggled with this portrait was I kind of oversaturated the skin tones. I don't know what I was thinking when I first started mixing them. I was seeing a lot more oranges than there were, so it ended up being more saturated than I would have wanted it to be compared to the reference photo. And I suppose I could go in and try to fix that, but like I said, it's just a sketch, and the goal is not to make it perfect. The goal is to practice, and that's what I did. I learned that I oversaturated the colors in my head, and I'll have to correct for that if that is not my intended goal in the future. Alright, we're at the end of the video already. Let me know if there's any specific topics you guys want to hear me talk about, because I feel like I just talk pretty randomly without direction. So if you want me to like talk about techniques or I don't know, any topic really, just let me know, and maybe that'll help my voiceovers be a little more interesting to you. Thanks for watching. If you like my content, please like, comment, or subscribe. And yeah, have a good day. Bye.